Good afternoon, folks. Welcome to today's webinar presentation. My name is Patrick Ray. I am one of the AT&T focused retirement advisors here with the Retirement Group, and I'll be your host for the afternoon. And we have a lot of information to cover today, and mostly it's correlated to some of the recent volatility and things that you've seen in the marketplace that have made many of our folks uncomfortable with respect to making certain decisions with their retirement funds and their 401k and specific investment decisions with their outside monies, and then ultimately retirement type decisions. And so we're going to cover a lot of what we feel is the core and some of the things that you want to focus on to get yourself in a position so that you're comfortable knowing that there's a long-term plan in place to meet your overall goals and objectives. But before I get started, I want to cover a couple of things so we're all on the same page. First and foremost, we are not affiliated in any way with AT&T, nor are we affiliated with Fidelity. And as it turns out, our experience comes with the thousands of people we have met with over the years to help them position and gain confidence in getting to a comfortable and a successful retirement. And one of the ways amongst many that you do that is by educating yourself on things that you should be aware of or things that you should understand, or at least to the best degree understand maybe better than you did before, to get yourself in a position so that you're making decisions that are correlated to a plan that's consistent with your overall goals, your overall financial objectives, and your overall tolerance for risk, and many things that we'll talk about today. So throughout the presentation today, you're going to find some links into the chat that will give you access to our educational center, which has ebooks that you can read. They're short to read topics that we get asked on a pretty regular basis that are great need to know type things. There's also access to the webinars that we've recorded in the past, which we encourage you to check out and peruse at your own leisure for sure. You can also gain access to the AT&T retirement guide that we've put together to help you get along and get through the process of achieving and maintaining a successful retirement. So I encourage you to check that out if you haven't already done so, as well as maybe the most important thing, which is a complimentary cash flow analysis to stress test where it is that you stand from meeting your overall goals and objectives. And so sometimes that's a little frustrating because you may find that you're behind where you want to actually be, but frankly, the sooner you understand and find that out, the better we feel you'll be suited to make some of these important financial decisions later in your retirement or getting into your retirement years. So a little bit about the Retirement Group. The Retirement Group has been around for over 150 years of experience with all of us that come to the table and help our folks who are in positions similar to yours. We have offices across the country, and basically we have a very intimate knowledge of your savings plan, your pension plans, and how they're calculated and what they mean to you, as well as your overall benefits package, all in an encompassing understanding of getting to educating you on which specifically applies to you and how you can basically make the most of that. But as it turns out, and mostly we want to encourage you to take advantage of the cash flow analysis, because if you hadn't already done so, it's a way to find out if you're actually on track to meet your overall goals. If you hadn't already done so, please feel free to take a picture of this QR code on the screen to get access to our LinkedIn page. This is where we update all of our new material related to interest rate changes and things that are going on at the company, and things that we may hear that are happening across the country that you may want to be aware of. So I encourage you to follow that for sure. And then you'll also find a link into the chat today to get access to more AT&T specific webinars that we do. And we find that they're pretty encouraging to follow and stay tuned with respect to new material and updates that we have that we do on a very regular basis. So I encourage you to follow those. And so today's theme, you're going to find, I'm going to talk quite a bit about the planning process and having a fundamental understanding of the things that are important to you and your family to overall meet your goals and objectives. And one of those things is to follow a checklist that we've kind of developed over the years that we feel kind of hit on and address many of the things that we get questions and specific concerns about on a very regular basis. And the first and foremost is the comfortability that you have of making this decision to exit AT&T. And I'm also going to refer to exiting AT&T in some cases, because sometimes people think that just because they leave AT&T, they're effectively retiring. And that may be the case for some of you, but most recently with the changes in interest rates and the changes to the benefit packages that have been happening over the most recent few years, that many of our folks are considering leaving AT&T to maximize the pool of capital that they have with respect to their pension values, and then moving to a career or a job that's more consistent with something they enjoy doing. And so that means that you're making the most of your capital when you have a chance to do so, but in fact, not technically retiring as a way to ride off into the sunset, so to speak. And so when you have the comfortability of a plan in place that's consistent with all these things that are important to you, it helps with the emotional aspect of the dealings that you have of making some of the most important financial decisions that you'll have to make. And so I'm going to talk about some of the basics with respect to the emotions and what's involved in making some of your important financial decisions. And I think you'll be better prepared to make and meet some of these things in the future after we chat this afternoon. Decreasing your risk when you're preparing to leave and make a decision like exiting AT&T or retiring in this case, or in some cases that volatility has a lot to do with that. And we've talked to many people here in the most recent few weeks, as it turns out, to have changed their technical thought process of planning to retire in this particular tax year, but because of the recent volatility, they have allowed their emotions to take control and change their minds. And so I'm going to give you some feedback on why you may want to rethink that thought process in general, but basically it's going to fall back to the core of having a decision that's made that is also consistent with all of your goals and the things that are important to you and your family by having a foundation to work from. And so we'll talk more about decreasing your risk and the volatility of things going forward. Increasing your retirement income is clearly one of the most important tools or factors in the people that we speak to. We're trying to get you the biggest bang for your buck, so to speak, which is why we often compare the difference between taking the lump sum as an example versus taking the annuity payment as an example, and comparing the two on which may be best for you and your family. So it's not always the case where you just want to assume that you're going to take the lump sum as a distribution from your pension, because in fact, sometimes it may be best for you to take an annuity payment. But we want to make sure that we do the analysis and the comparisons for you to help you figure out which one of these two make more sense to you. Decreasing taxes, which is also connected to penalties. This is sometimes intertwined with two different things: taxes from an IRS or penalties from an IRS perspective, in addition to penalties that are associated with your pension plan. So it's conceivable that you might even be service pension eligible at AT&T, but still have penalties or discounts, or what they refer to, because you're not of a certain age. And so we encourage you to maybe check out our webinar that we've done on specific pension stuff for AT&Ts to have a better understanding of what I'm talking about. But I'm delighted maybe at the end to address any questions that you may have regarding this to give you a better understanding of what that means. But it's possible that you are service pension eligible at AT&T and still have penalties on your pension plan. But in a nutshell, this checklist was really formulated to kind of help us plan and build a foundation so that we can ensure that we're addressing things both pre and post retirement that are consistent with all of the things that are important to you. And so the more that you do the planning and the more homework and time you put into the exercise of trying to prepare for one of the biggest financial decisions that you'll have to make, clearly we feel like the better suited you're going to have or be in developing a comfortable retirement. And so tied to your retirement, of course, is where you're going to get your money from. So first and foremost, most of us are going to have some form of Social Security as a form of retirement income, which is great. And when Social Security was initially set up, it was designed to replace a decent percentage of your income. And as time goes on, it's producing less and less and less of that percentage. And so this means that there's more stress than ever on you or myself or anybody who was in a position to think about retirement at some point in time to save money in their controllable funds, which happens for you as an AT&T employee to be your 401k. Because if you're, as an employee, available or eligible for a pension, there's only so much you can do, right? As far as accumulating credits with respect to the income that you have and how that's applied if you're a manager, or basically your pension ban if you are a non-manager, but it's pretty structured. And so between Social Security and your pension, it's a fairly fixed bucket of money. So if you want the ultimate flexibility in retirement, your number one priority is to plow as much money as you possibly can into your 401k. and then further make adjustments and try to do your best to ensure that that money is consistent with meeting your long-term goals and objectives. And so this is kind of a core or a basis of the funds that you're ultimately going to rely on when it comes time to making a decision to retire. And so in conjunction with making your decision to retirement, there are a few things that I think are important to kind of cover with respect to your financial decisions, both on the theory and some of the basics of understanding the definition of finance, and then how your emotions ultimately play a role, sometimes for the good and sometimes for the not so good. And so from a standard theory of finance, what's happening here is we're making an assumption that you're thinking from a rational perspective. And I can appreciate that many people think that's how they act on a regular basis. But when it comes time to lifetime financial decisions, oftentimes this is not the case. And so from a standard theory of finance perspective, we're assuming that you make rational decisions, that you consider all known information, so you know everything about the reasonings behind your decisions, and that you accurately assess what that technically means so that you can say yes or no. Now, from a market perspective, this, of course, is also assuming that the markets are doing the same thing, which means that they're incorporating all known material and that they're representing at that particular time the true value of any security that you're considering purchasing. So you can see that in a nutshell, this is kind of a tough thing to assume that basically this means that 100% of all things are basically hitting on all cylinders. And so that's very tough to do when you're thinking in terms of financial decisions, because unfortunately what happens is your emotions play a role in this, and it's part of the behavioral characteristics of the financial planning side of things. And so it's important to understand that while for the same reasons we want to have a base foundation for all of our decisions from a planning perspective, we also want to have a base understanding of the decisions that we make on the investments that we make, or the timing of your retirement, or what to do with your savings and those kind of things from a financial perspective under the standard theory. And so behavioral theory just simply forms as an overlay to the base foundation of our financial planning decisions. And we assume that further on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, people are not rational, because most of us don't make rational decisions 100% of the time. And so on top of that, that we're also assuming that we also do not know all of the information. So you're making decisions on what is effectively imperfect information. So that's from the investor side of things. And then you add in the market side of things, where the markets may be difficult to beat in the long term because of the decisions that we're making that are short-term correlated, in addition to the anomalies and the excesses of things that are completely out of our control, like what's happening overseas in the Ukraine, as an example, or how we're dealing with inflation, which is correlated to interest rates, as another example. And then the uncertainty of future growth patterns for the growth-related stocks, as another example. So today's focus is really based on the behavioral characteristics of how that ties into the standard overlay of having a plan and the importance of those things. And so let's take a look at some of the behavioral characteristics purposes. In other words, if you understand the best day to retire, as an example, because it maximizes the pool of capital from AT&T, then you're ahead. More importantly, maybe it's not because you're ready to retire, but it's just strictly to maximize the pool of capital in your pension, because you're seeing a very negative addition to your pension values because of the interest rate environments. I mean, we have seen interest rates have a massive increase in the most recent 6 months from when the rates were established to be effective for this particular tax year, which happened in November of 2021. And so that rate is good for the entire tax year. But if you're not planning on retiring or leaving the payroll this particular year, that interest rate is going to have a negative impact in a big way to your pension value if you're making the assumption that the lump sum is the best option for you to take. And so understanding the best day of retire might be your first and foremost priority as an AT&T employee. This will also help you with this core foundation that I'm referring to. Develop a better investment strategy. I mean, I can't tell you how many times that we talk to people, especially most recently in the last few weeks, that are trying to make changes to their 401k because of what's recently happened in the market with the declines in the equity-based markets. And it's frankly a reactionary decision that if you feel the need to make these decisions in the here and now, you may very well have already positioned your assets in a more aggressive manner than they need to be. And so this needs to be established prior to making a decision to move your assets after they've declined by 15 or 20 or 25% or more. So staying the course is important, but you can only do that if you have a core foundation and a plan that's consistent with all the things that you're hoping to gain over your life expectancy. And so in general, over the 23 years that I've been in this business, my experience is that the more we spend and the time and effort and planning in all of these things that I'm referring to, the more comfortable the ride is going to be. Sure, there's going to be peaks and there's going to be valleys, but if it's consistent with what's important to you and you know that there's a plan in place, it makes it for a far more better investor experience so that you're not losing sleep or, more importantly, having some kind of health related issue because the market went down by 10 or 15% in a given month or something. Now, having said all of that, behavioral characteristics, as I mentioned, are one of the kind of key factors on the variable side, if you will, where our emotions are taking place of some of the decisions, both on the good side and the bad side. And they're referring to things when we talk about behavioral characteristics like loss aversion, things like mental accounting. We all have heard the term diversification, but not many of us actually employ a definition of real diversification, not just from an asset-based perspective, but from a holding perspective, and both of those in addition to some other factors that need to be taken into consideration. You have a herding mentality in some cases in AT&T with respect to what your neighbors are doing, and this happened countless times in my experience in dealing with folks who are making decisions with what to do with their 401k because one of their coworkers said, this is how you should have your money managed. And even though that has no correlation at all whatsoever to what's important to you, that's what they actually did. And so here it is after the fact, we're doing a review and an example. And when I asked the question, why on earth are we doing what we're doing in your 401k? There's no specific answer because they're unsure of why they did that to begin with. And so being careful about herding with respect to just simply doing what the general population is doing is certainly something you want to be mindful of. Having regret as to kind of a decision that you've made that you ultimately had turned out negatively, and trying to unwind that as an example to make you feel better about whatever it is that you decided to do from a financial perspective. And so these are a number of different things that are correlated to the behavioral side of things, but I want to focus on two of them specifically. And we talked often about herding, as it turns out, with what your neighbors and coworkers and friends are doing. And this is an example of a rating system that is often referred to, and some of you may be familiar with this, which is a company called Morningstar. And Morningstar has a rating system to give a rating to a specific mutual fund from a star of 1 to a star of 5. And so, of course, in the grand scheme of things, you're looking for a 5-star fund, which is kind of this definition of an all world. It means everything to whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish for a specific investment decision. But what you have to be careful of is that there was a study that was done on many occasions, and this is just one of many examples of a period where you take a interval of time and you start stretching that out to only find that 5-star fund that you initially purchased after 3 and 5 and 10 years become less and less and less of a 5-star rated fund. So in other words, over time, it becomes less favorable to own that fund that you purchased, say, 3 to 5 years ago, because at the time you purchased the fund, it was a 5-star fund. And so this is an example of doing what is the hot topic, if you will. And you have to be careful of knowing that the results that had been accomplished or established prior to your decision are in the past, and they have no bearing on what's going to occur going forward. And so you want to certainly be not just mindful of this, but you certainly want to have an understanding of how this applies specifically to your overall goals, because basically buying the current hot funds, if you will, might very well be the wrong thing for you to do. Now, there's been multiple studies on this particular behavioral characteristic, which is loss aversion. In a nutshell, people just don't like to lose money, right? And that stands for not just me, but for everybody for the most part. Everyone, in theory, has the basic desire of not losing any money. But as it turns out, most people are only comfortable with taking a certain percentage or a certain amount of risk to gain a certain amount before they're willing to actually or technically invest your funds. And so many people will only assume that they'll be willing to take the risk of a $10,000 investment, as an example, if they can earn at least $20,000 in whole. Now, is that right? Well, it could be if your goals and objectives are correlated to a decision like that. The problem is that many people don't assume to think in terms of how this would apply to them before they make their actual decisions on what they do. Now, certainly, as it turns out, this is a way that we establish relationships with folks, because many people don't not only have the interest in doing so, they don't have the desire or the time or the wherewithal to have thought how these things apply to their goals and objectives specifically. And this is why they're looking for a partner in retirement, because regardless of what you do, or more importantly, when you do it, there are going to be market downturns in a general cycle. And it doesn't matter if you're both still on the payroll today or you ultimately retire, because it's going to happen as an unknown when you ultimately retire too. So this is kind of a pretty unique slide that talks about the net cash flows of money going into and out of world equity-based funds. And so the difference between the green lines and the blue lines, or the blue graph, is the green line shows you the performance of the markets, and the blue lines reference the monies that are technically going into and or out of mutual funds at that given time. So what's unique about this is if you see when the markets are down, people are pulling money out of the market. And when the markets are going up, people are plowing money into the market. Now, if I were to ask you prior to showing this slide to you, what the ideal thing to do when you go to buy a stock is, I'll bet you most of you could tell me that in a perfect world, you'd want to buy your stocks when the market is down or low, and you would want to sell your stocks when the market is up or high. But I just showed you a slide that actually shows the exact opposite is happening. And this is a behavioral characteristic that is tied to what we've been talking about most of the afternoon so far, because many people can't get around the emotional part of their decisions. And so they're making decisions not just at the wrong time, but they're making them for the wrong reasons. And so most of the folks that we've spoke to, certainly in the most recent few weeks, because of the market volatility and the activities in the market, is to try to get to a core understanding of what they're trying to accomplish. And many of them have no clue what the answer is. So this gets back to the significance of the general conversation of having a core or base understanding of what you're trying to accomplish overall before you even get started, so that you can ensure that these things are correlated and you have your best decisions and certainly your best outcomes over the long term in place. Now, part of the volatility of what we're seeing is correlated to interest rates, which I mentioned a few minutes ago, have risen significantly in the most recent 6 months. And this turns into inflation as a whole, where we're combating the price of costs of goods and services going up. And so one of the main objectives that we all have from a retirement perspective is overcoming the effects of inflation on your retirement portfolio. And this is one of the toughest things that you have to do. So many people think about their most recent activity of, I'm going to retire in 6 months or 2 years or 3 years. And they try to make their investment decisions that have a timetable that's correlated to that. And while that's important for sure to understand when you're planning on exiting for many reasons from the company, the reality is that your life expectancy is what mostly drives the long-term plan or the foundation of what's important to you and your family. And so if you think as an average, the males for us were living to about 84.6, and the females, for those of you who are here, are getting to about 86 and a half-ish. And what that means is that if you retire or leave the payroll at 55 or 60 years old, you literally have a third of your life left to ensure that all the money you saved in your 401k and everything you've accumulated in your pension is designed to last you at least that long. Now, clearly, if we knew the date we were going to die, you would know exactly how long you had to spend whatever funds that you had. But the reality is we don't know that. And so inflation is one of the toughest objectives that we have to overcome. And as you can see by this slide, for roughly every 1% of interest rate change, you can see an impact specifically as an example to your pension value of roughly 8 to 10, and in some cases 12%. The younger you are, the more this affects you. Now, as it turns out, the interest rates have almost gone up by close to 2% since November. So you can see that this is going to have a very significant impact on many of you who are considering either leaving the payroll or retiring in the next few years. So what we've been advocating as a whole is to understand what these impacts technically mean to you so that you can make an important decision and understand the impacts, whether you decide to stay and or leave AT&T. But inflation is for sure one of the most important objectives for us to overcome, and it's one of the most difficult things for us to do. And so when we talk to these folks who are calling in a frantic panic as to what to do with their 401ks and their outside investments because the market is down by 10 or 15 or 20% or something, one of the most important things is to stick with an investment strategy that's consistent with your long-term goals and objectives, which I just talked about. For many of you are in your mid to late 80s. So we can't really think about what's best for us tomorrow. We have to also include not just what's best for us tomorrow, but what's best for us over our life expectancy. And so in order to do that, we need to have a plan that's consistent with all of those things. It's probably prudent for you to not pay very close attention to what you're hearing in the media. I mean, my guess is when you leave the office, or if many of you are still working from home, you go from your office to your living room to try to digress from the afternoon and kind of compress and just kind of enjoy some personal time. If you watch the news, most of what you see in the news is not pleasant. It's negative information, and a lot of it is correlated to negative financial things that have happened, especially if the market goes down by a bunch in a given day or in a given week. And so we encourage you to be careful about what you're doing with respect to your media response as to what you're paying attention to, and more importantly, being careful of using those as tools or reasons that you think you need to make a change or an adjustment in your overall financial and retirement plans, for sure. But maybe the most important part of this particular slide is to not feel that you have an obligation or there's some kind of requirement for you to make a reaction to every piece of information that you hear. I mean, if you take a look of the historical time frame of the stock market in general, you're going to see this EKG looking chart from start to finish. And that's going to happen and consistently happen for the rest of your life, whether you're working at AT&T or not. And so we need to be at peace with knowing that the volatility is going to exist, and how you react to the volatility should be correlated to what's best for you as your overall goals and objectives, which should already have a plan in place to deal with that. And so therefore, it takes a lot away from the emotional aspect of thinking in terms of needing to make a decision to respond to, as a reactionary approach, what's already occurred in the marketplace. So as our advice goes, there's a number of questions that we feel are prudent to ask, whether you're interviewing to have an advisor or to change advisors or to start a relationship with an advisor, which is what we're here to do, is to help people with whom it is that is looking for help into and leading into and past retirement. And so some of the things you want to know is, first of all, do they offer a complimentary financial plan? You should not be paying for this, folks. This is something that we do for you as a complimentary basis, or as a complimentary part of our additions to making some of these most important decisions that you have to make. So you should not be paying for one of these things. Okay, so there's many folks and firms similar to ours that do this as a service to start a relationship and at least get to the point where you're comfortable interacting with someone who might be in a position to help you and address your specific questions and concerns. Certainly, you want to understand what benefits that they apply or bring to the table with respect to, websites, how often you communicate, what you're looking for the relationship that you deal with or looking to enter into as a partnership, which also ties into how much you're getting charged. Certainly, you want to know what the fees are for how the investments are set up. You want to know if they have fiduciary capacity, and if so, what that means to them and to you. And in addition, maybe just as an overall understanding, an expectation for you to know what it is that you're trying to gain by having a partnership with someone. What is important to you? What are the things that you want to have addressed? How often do you want to communicate? What are your expectations from a return perspective? How much income do you need to live off of it? There's a number of these questions. Of course, I could continue to go on and on and on, but these are just some of the questions that we feel are prudent for you to develop and ask when you're looking to establish a relationship or a partnership with someone in retirement. If you have any interest in speaking to us, we're delighted to chat with you for sure. And we feel like we have a ton of value to give you a compelling reason to talk to the advisors, that there's plenty of us to help you with your questions and concerns at the Retirement Group. And so you can reach out to us by emailing us at info@theretirementgroup.com. You can call our 800 number, which is 800-900-5867. You can schedule some time if it's convenient for you by taking a picture of this QR code to the left, and that'll get you access to a calendar where you can pick a timetable to schedule some time with an advisor to answer your questions specifically. And as I mentioned at the beginning, there's also another copy of this QR code that gets you access to our LinkedIn page. And if you're not following us on LinkedIn, if you're a social media person, I encourage you to do that, because there's a lot of updates that we bring to the table on our LinkedIn page. So please feel free to do that. So what I'm going to do with the time now is, I know that there are a few questions that we have that I need to address. And so I want to go ahead and do that now. If you have questions about anything that we've covered today or something that's specific to you, please feel free to ask those in the question and answer box, and I'll do my best to get to those. So here's a question. Question is, I was prepared to retire in July, but with all this bad news, I am thinking about moving it back to next year. Am I being irrational? Boy, this is a great question. And I think you want to be careful about a general consensus, right? I don't want to assume that anyone's either rational or irrational, but certainly we talked this afternoon about some of the irrational behaviors with respect to how you're thinking with your finances, and more specifically, your retirement decisions or anything correlated to that. So do I think it's a mistake that you rethink the timing of you leaving AT&T? Well, I guess there's a number of questions I would have. One of which would be, are you planning on retiring, as in retiring and no longer working? Or are you thinking about leaving AT&T to maximize the capital there because you're thinking about the lump sum and the interest rates are affecting your lump sum in a big way if you stay on the payroll past this particular tax year? Then I don't think you're being irrational at all by rethinking that. But the way you do that, of course, is from a planning perspective. You want to know if maybe you should turn your thoughts to, instead of taking the lump sum, maybe you should consider taking the annuity payment. Now, that changes a lot with respect to how your future income is going to apply to you and what needs to happen to try to outpace inflation over time. And so there's a ton of variables to this question. But I would say that there's a part of this that is being irrational because that's your driving force in the event that you're technically thinking about postponing your retirement because the variables of what's happening in the market or are discouraging you. Maybe it's making you uncomfortable to see the marketplace that's down. I can show you, or we can reference the time of the best time to actually retire is when the markets are down. So I would encourage you to rethink that for sure, as just a general context of when you want to retire. And basically, if you're taking the lump sum, you have this large pool of capital that's basically been in a cash-oriented investment, and it gives you a chance to invest those proceeds when the market's suppressed. And we talked earlier about the ideal time to buy or sell a specific stock or an investment. You want to buy when things are low. And so you could argue that technically when the markets are down, it's the best time to retire. And so I would say that I don't know that you're being irrational in a general context, but certainly this brings up a great point with just understanding all of the variables involved. I do not think it's a terrible idea for you to consider postponing this decision in the to the extent where you understand what the repercussions are of that. And maybe the thing to do is, as opposed to postponing your decision and staying on the payroll at AT&T, maximizing your capital at AT&T and leaving AT&T, but not retiring and going to work in a place where you're more comfortable, or certainly it's something more enjoyable than what you're currently doing at AT&T. So I hope that answered your question for sure. Another question: I'm concerned about making a plan and then having unexpected expenses impact my funds from AT&T to the point of depletion. How can I plan for something like this? This is a great question. And this is why it's imperative that you do the planning ahead of time before you decide to make any life-changing decision like I'm going to retire, or I'm going to leave AT&T and go to work for company X or Y or Z. And the answer I think that's most prudent to this particular question is, if you're unsure of what variables may occur down the road and could ultimately derail your retirement, you could argue a number of things. Like, you could build in a safety net for an added expense that builds a additional savings to your cash flow for an untimely circumstance that could come up. This could be other expenses that you might run into in the future. This could be related to healthcare related costs that you want to protect yourself from and or save for. But in a nutshell, you could plan for this, and you could, in theory, increase the projected inflation return that you're getting on your investments and reduce your rate of return that you think you're going to get over time. This is all the purpose of doing the cash flow analysis and kind of stress testing where you're at, so that you can run these different variables and have a better feel for what, if any, of these things technically apply to you. Okay. And looks like the last question is, inflation is causing me and some of my friends concerns. What are the best tips for ensuring we keep our emotions out of our money that you may not have mentioned during the meeting? Boy, I can't harp enough that the technical answer to this question is having a plan. Having a plan and sticking to the plan, and ensuring that that plan is consistent with your goals, your objectives, your tolerance for risk, your future need for income, your ability to absorb volatility, your emotions that are tied to this question. I mean, there's a ton of variables that are considered as part of what I would think is this question specifically. And in a nutshell, I don't know that I haven't covered much in this webinar that wouldn't apply to this question. So most everything that I've talked about today is certainly part of this in some way, shape, or form. But I can't think of anything that I didn't really cover in the webinar that would apply to this. But the main core of the question is to have a plan. And it takes a lot of the guessing and the uncertainty of your future out of the equation. And so the more you spend planning for one of the most important financial decisions that you have, the better suited you're going to be, and the more comfortable this whole process is going to be. It's just going to make for a more favorable investor experience. So I guess that's it. Thank you very much for spending some time with me this afternoon. I hope you found value in what we had to talk about today. And if you have any further questions or concerns, call us at 800-900-5867, or you can also email us at info@theretirementgroup.com. I mentioned that there was a specific link to get access to our upcoming webinars that are AT&T focused. So I encourage you to check those out and sign up for those in the event that you have some interest. And until next time, we'll see you. Take care, folks. Everyone stay safe.